Let me ask you, Father, a question as we're talking about the Shroud of Turin. One thing I'm wondering about as a scientist, do you believe that we have these quote-unquote relics, the shroud, let's say, the burial headcloth of our Lord, as you mentioned? Is that a function of an intention for God to give us clues to help our faith? Or is that purely a function of science in the sense that this experience occurred and these are evidence of that scientific happening? Or both?
Well, I think it's both, really, because honestly, I think God kind of has provided for us some clues that we would need in a scientific age. What I find so fascinating, of course, is that we as people could never have anticipated what we would need kind of to bolster faith after the 19th century. And of course, all this has been, prepared 2,000 years earlier so that, we have a perfect photographic image. And finally, some guy, Secundo Pia, says, hey, this is a perfect photographic image, a negative image. You might take a look at this, right? How are we going to produce this? And then, of course, I haven't even gotten into the evidence for the resurrection here, but I might stray into that right now because, it is so remarkable. Only today can we show how miraculous this image is on the Shroud of Turin, because we need the scientific equipment, namely the lasers, etc., that are in a laboratory in order to replicate it and show the requirements for reproducing it. But let me just say this really quickly about the resurrection. That image, as I said before, is a perfect photographic negative, and it's very difficult to produce an image like that when you put it into its positive form is going to produce not only a perfect image of this man, but is also going to produce a three-dimensional image, which I'll talk about later, because you're going to see the bones in the hand as well as the flesh surrounding the bones of the hand, etc. I mean, this is a 3D deal. I mean, this is how precise this image is. Now, when you think about it, you think, okay, now how did this image get produced to be this perfect photographic negative? Well, did it come from vapors that were being emitted from Jesus's body? Nope, no vapors, right? Did it come from dyes? No, there's no dyes. Did it come from any kind of paints? No, no paints. Could it have come from scorching or burning? Nope, this did not come from scorching or burning. Finally, we've discovered with the work of Jumper and Jackson and a variety of other good scientists that this is produced by very rapid dehydration. Now, the interesting thing about it is that rapid dehydration on the cloth, that only penetrates the very surface of the fibrils. It never penetrates into the medulla of the fiber itself. So essentially what you're dealing with, right, is just on the very surface, you basically have this rapid dehydration, which has turned a non-photographically sensitive cloth, I mean, as non-photographically sensitive as you can get, into something which is incredibly photographically sensitive to the point of being a perfect three-dimensional negative photographic image. Now, how do you reproduce this? How do you get rapid dehydration just on the very outermost surface of the fibrils? And we've only been able to do it in one fashion, right? You can't use any normal light source, right? If you used a normal light source, right, with that amount of wattage to turn that cloth into a non-photographically sensitive cloth into a photographically sensitive cloth, right? That would just burn the cloth instantly, right? It would just scorch it. I mean, it would vaporize it, quite frankly. So you're going to have a light, some form of light, which dissipates very, very quickly. The only thing we really have in our laboratories that replicates that is what's called vacuum ultraviolet radiation. Now, of course, it exists in the universe in various ways, but the intensity and the localization of vacuum ultraviolet radiation, that would produce an image like this. That can only happen in a laboratory right now, and generally we produce it with what's called an excimer ARF laser, which is a very specialized laser that can produce this vacuum ultraviolet radiation. Now, what's so good about vacuum ultraviolet radiation? It dissipates after 1/40 billionth of a second. So 1/40 billionth of a second. You can't, that's fast. And you can't have it last any longer than that, because if you do, you'll either burn the cloth, or if it lasts even a little teeny bit longer than that, right? I mean, just a fraction of a second longer, it'll vaporize the cloth.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm assuming the House of Savoy didn't have a lot of those around the house to create something like this,
didn't.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, of course, what we're dealing with is then and of course, it goes back, to the 13th century, where we can trace the pedigree of the cloth. I can just see those medieval forgers with those excimer ARF lasers. But the main point is, if you really want to produce the image of the cloth with an excimer ARF laser, you'd need 14,000 of them to produce that image, which is more than the total capacity of those kinds of lasers in the entire world today. Now, just to give you an idea, the magnitude of the light wattage, so you notice on your light bulb that light brightness is measured in watts, right? So you get a 100-watt light bulb. The magnitude of the light emitted in that shroud from every three-dimensional point of the body that emitted that light for 1/40 billionth of a second was several billion, that's billion watts. Now, that's several billion watts, right? We're talking like solar radiation kind of stuff, right? But it lasts so short, right? Such a short duration, right? That in 1/40 billionth of a second, that it doesn't vaporize the cloth. Instead, it produces this rapid dehydration, which turns the non-photographically sensitive cloth into like photographic paper for a split second. Right. I mean a split second, with intensities that are not 100 watts like a light bulb, several billion watts like the sun. And so we're talking about, how does a dead body do this? Right. And how does a dead body emit light from every three-dimensional point within it? And how does it emit 1/40 billionth of a second light at a magnitude of several billion watts? If you can tell me that, then I can tell you that we don't need a supernatural explanation for the origin of the image of the cloth. But if you can't tell me that, if you have no plausible physical explanation for how a dead body did that, then I'm going to say you need a supernatural explanation.
So let me ask you, Father,
to explain.
While you're talking about that, so this thing happened in an unbelievable short period of time. What was that? Is that the resurrection?
A burst
what is
of
that?
light. Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? What is that?
I look at it as the transition moment from, Jesus's physical body to a transphysical, glorified body, which is, not just, physical light, but his glorified body is a transphysical luminosity as well. But that's the moment of transition, that 1/40 billionth of a second, and that's the only explanation I can think of. But I know one thing, that didn't have a physical cause, that had a transphysical cause, a supernatural cause, because I just can't think of any plausible explanation for how any possible dead body could do that from every three-dimensional point within it. It's just, we're left with a relic of a resurrection that begins with a burst of light and moves to some trans-physical, glorious nature that, of course, is the Jesus who appears to the apostles, and he appears in glory story and gets them in Matthew's gospel, right? Matthew's gospel, they all are bowing down and worshiping. They think they're seeing God,
Right.
and in Luke's gospel, they're scared out of their minds, thinking that they're seeing a spirit, right? In John's gospel, when Jesus appears, right, they're calling, never before in John's gospel do we see that the word ha-kurios is used of Jesus. That's with the definite article, the Lord. See, if you just use Lord of Jesus without the definite article, ha, meaning the, it just means master, teacher, mister, right, sir. But if you put, ha-kurios, that's the Greek Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Yahweh, Adonai, right, the divine name. Then suddenly, right after the resurrection, right, on the lips of the apostles, not the narrator will say, Jesus, using the name of Jesus, appeared in the room. But on the lips of the apostles, they are seeing the Lord with the definite article, right? And of course, we see on the lips of Thomas where he explicitly says, ha theos mu, ha kurios mu, right? The God, theos, right? The God of me, the Lord of me, using the Greek translation, the divine name. We see in that curious passage in the Johannine appendix as well. In John 21, Peter has just hauled, swam ashore, and the apostles are hauling the rest of the fish ashore, and Peter's sitting there with Jesus, and of course, there's this comment. No one dared to ask him, who are you? Because they knew very well, Estin ha-kurios. It was the Lord with the definite article, right? Meaning Yahweh, the divine one. So all of a sudden in John's gospel, we don't have the same, references that Jesus is coming like God and everybody's bowing down and worshiping in Matthew, or that he's coming as this spirit, which is terrifying, and causing terror to rise up in their hearts like Luke, but we have the divine referent being used of the risen Jesus. And during the ministry of Jesus, of course John believes he is, God during that time, but the apostles don't see him as God. They see him as man, and they recognize him through his miracles and his preaching to be God. But after the resurrection, they see him as God, and Jesus has to identify himself through the wounds of crucifixion, and he has to specially identify himself. It's me that you are seeing, that it's the human Jesus, but I've changed, and I've changed into a very godlike form, my glorified body, and that's the kind of clue we get, for that 1/40 billionth of a second embedded right there on this relic of the resurrection, the Shroud of Turin. We not only get the wounds of Jesus and his crucifixion that Dr. Pierre Barbet did a long time ago in this wonderful book of Dr. Calvert wrote this book, and it's still a very valid book today. We also get that relic of the resurrection, which is a beautiful clue from God that he prepared for us 2,000 years ago, so that when we got our old Excimer ARF lasers out of our laboratory today, we could actually say, hey, look at that. The only way of replicating this is with several billion watts of energy that come from vacuum ultraviolet radiation at 1/40 billionth of a second.